What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at AVAIYA is what the world needs.
Hello, AVAIYA family. I'm Andy Anderson. My partner Ike Allen and I are teachers, mentors, and the co-owners of AVAIYA University. AVAIYA is the creator of over 1,000 books, films, courses, teachings, and other supportive resources. Thank you so much for joining us. Our fellow teacher, Marquita Johnson, is back with us today to talk about overcoming emotional neglect, unlearning people-pleasing behaviors. Marquita is a licensed professional counselor, nationally certified counselor, board-certified telemental health counselor, certified professional counselor, supervisor, and speaker. Her specialties include women's issues, dating, divorce, spirituality, and step families. Welcome back to AVAIYA, Marquita.
Thank you so much, Andy. Glad to be back here today and sharing a bit with your audience.
Yeah, always good to have you. And I love today's topic. I'm super excited about, well, I love the topic of codependency as a whole, but people pleasing is always like one of those big struggles. So good to dive into that. So let's start first though with emotional neglect, right? So what are some signs of emotional neglect?
So this feeling the need to be perfect, so that perfectionism comes up again. And often when you are worried about harsh judgment or someone being critical of you or living up to unrealistic expectations, that can be a part of emotional neglect, but also not feeling seen or heard in a relationship. So often your feelings, your thoughts, your experiences, your passions are all minimized by your partner. You don't have an identity in this relationship. Essentially, your partner's identity has engulfed yours. So you do not exist in the relationship. And that can feel very isolating. It can feel very lonely and a very painful experience. So it's really important for one to understand that not only are they allowing their partner to judge them and be critical, but they're also judging themselves and being really critical. So they're using the same measures that their partner has adopted to measure them. They have embraced those same things. And so it leaves that person feeling less of themselves and exploring the low self-esteem, which also comes a part of the experience of emotional neglect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned the being engulfed in the relationship and how we can lose our identities. That's something that I've definitely struggled with over the years of different relationships and even like there are the relationships where the other person like wants you to lose your identity, and then there are the relationships like, for example, mine with Ike is like he does not want me to lose my identity. He wants me to be my own person, but I have these tendencies where I still like kind of enmesh myself into him and get lost sometimes. So super important to figure out, right, who it is we are, where our boundaries are.
Right. And it's good that you have a partner that helps support that and helps you explore that, as opposed to someone that's pushing against that. So that could be a sign if you find that someone is often like, you know, I think of the movie with Julia Roberts that talked about like Runaway Bride. That was Runaway Bride. And so how do you like your eggs? And it was dependent on whoever she was with. That's how she liked her eggs. And it was like, no, how do you like your eggs? And so really exploring like your likes and dislikes outside of the relationship. Mm-hmm. You should feel that safety within that relationship to be who you are and not feel like you have to be engulfed and become whomever your significant other or partner wants you to be.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Very important. A good example of Runaway Bride. I haven't seen that in a long time, but I remember it. And so, okay. So how does emotional neglect impact people who struggle with codependency?
So the thing about that is you look at the attachment styles and you look at the emotional work that is involved in losing your identity. So that impacts your self-esteem, it impacts your self-worth, and then it actually lends to these unhealthy attachment styles. And it can go to exploitation and manipulation, where the person's avoiding conflict, they're avoiding confrontation, and they're allowing the person to solely depend on them for all of their emotional connection. So they're doing the work of the relationship. They're shouldering the responsibility. And I know a lot of us have been in relationships where we feel like we're doing 99.9% of the emotional work and our partner is just showing up and gaining all the benefits. So that could be a clear sign that this person, I've allowed them to become codependent on me. And what need am I getting met out of this? often we don't explore that. We often explore the person that is displaying the codependency behaviors, but we don't explore what is the person that is allowing the codependency to occur. What benefits are they getting out of that? Often there's this need to feel needed, to feel wanted, to be helpful, to be nurturing, but it can go to a very extreme place of over nurturing to a point where you don't allow that person to learn and struggle a bit, and be self-reliant. And often it goes all the way back to your childhood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that also comes up a lot, at least in my experience, in parent-child relationships too, right? Those parents that I've definitely had this experience, right? Didn't want to, let go of certain ways that their child was dependent on them, and
Covering.
and how damaging it really is to the kid, because then they don't learn and they don't grow and figure out stuff for themselves and become that independent self they need to eventually become, right?
Right, absolutely, because then they are no longer codependent on the parent as if the parent is the child rather is 2 as opposed to 22. Like there's a different type of parent that's needed for a 2-year-old as opposed to a 22-year-old. And so when you're exploring those avenues of how to nurture someone without being smothering, and so that in a relationship is really important. Nurture, but not smothering. And you also begin to minimize the partner's behaviors or even your child's behavior because you're constantly trying to rescue them. And they don't develop those skills of being able to bounce back from situations, and problem solving skills, which are so important.
Right. Yeah. I often think, also, right, so many, I'm kind of on this theme of the parental relationships, but a lot of times I think kids don't get to think for themselves. Right. And then they don't get to develop that. And that is so important, right. To be able to just figure something out for themselves as opposed to be dependent.
Right.
Yeah, obviously there's a balance too, right. Not being so independent that right, we're not connected. What about interdependency, right? So we're talking a lot about codependency and how it affects relationships. What is interdependency?
So interdependence is what we were leading to, is that balance of being able to be seen, being able to be heard, being able to express yourself in a relationship, and communicate your needs and allow someone else to communicate their needs to you, being able to depend on your partner and have your partner to depend on you. So that's that balance of that emotional support where no one's neglecting the other because the needs have been stated. And each person is able to communicate how they can support their partner in that need. There's no manipulation, and there's no sole responsibility being placed on one person within the relationship. They're working together, and they have communicated and identified their strengths and also their weaknesses. So this takes a lot of work, or areas of improvement is what I really like to call them. But that takes a lot of emotional work to understand that we are working together in this relationship. No one person is responsible for the success or the demise, that it takes both of us to make the relationship work. So that takes a lot of emotional intelligence there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And going back to emotional neglect, right? We're talking about how people can overcome that today. So what are some ways that people can overcome emotional neglect?
First, like anything, it's recognizing that it exists, and tracing the origins of when did I first feel this sense of neglect, whether that was from my parents or from maybe an earlier on relationship, that I could not, ask for what it is that I wanted and needed out of a relationship, but also receive what I want and what I need out of a relationship. When did I first feel like I couldn't communicate my needs, or that I felt like if I did, someone would abandon me, they would leave me, they would criticize me? Or when did I first feel unstable in a relationship or lack that security in a relationship? So again, it's so important, as we were talking about parent-child relationships, to go back and trace, like, when was the time that I felt that way? That's often a question I ask in therapy because it gives that pause for you to really like come to terms with, this isn't something that's just starting. This is something that's probably, I reach back a little bit and I can see it. Like in my previous relationships, I can feel it in my previous relationships. So we want to really be able to identify with that. So then that person is aware of, this is the feeling that comes up and this is how it's impacting me now, right now, today. And then a lot of mindfulness can really help. Giving yourself the ability to be present and be in the moment and feel your feelings, feel your experience. Always therapy. Therapy can help with guiding you on that journey of understanding the emotional neglect, maybe working through some forgiveness, maybe working through some forgiveness for yourself, maybe also giving yourself that space and giving yourself that grace to understand that it wasn't your fault. A lot of times there's a lot of self-blame. There's some shame and guilt there. I call them first cousins. So shame and guilt can be there. And also working on your self-esteem. So learning how to love oneself and learning about self-worth are really important because that's going to help bolster and build that identity up. And boundaries, and more boundaries. Like we cannot get enough of boundaries because that allows the person to know when you feel safe and when you feel unsafe, when you feel secure and when you feel unsecure or insecure rather in that relationship.